Good morning and welcome everyone to HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. We appreciate you joining us. This becomes kind of a midweek thing for us now, going on the air on other platforms, closer to the weekend. And things change rather quickly. We know it's heavy into football season right now, but there's no shortage of updates to give you concerning Razorbacks basketball. There's several interesting things that happen. Remember, Monday of this week, September the 23rd, is that right? Was the start of full-blown practices. So you had limited practices in June and July. When you got back to school, got back on campus for the fall semester, you had some other limited practice time. We've seen some good cut-ups and photos from the University of Arkansas men's basketball program on social media, chronicling some of that. But now is where the heavy business starts. And you're really at the end of September now. As you move into October, your exhibition season, we got dates on a lot of events going on in the exhibition season. Since we were last on a week ago, I think we only really touched on the Arkansas-Kansas game. We learned the playing date for that, but we've got dates for Arkansas's exhibition game at TCU. And we've got dates for Arkansas's intra-squad scrimmages, historically been called red-white games. Doesn't look like there'll be one in Fayetteville last year. I've not been able to do any research on that to see when the last time Arkansas didn't have a red-white game in Fayetteville, other than the COVID year. We know Arkansas didn't have an exhibition season that year, but under normal circumstances, when was the last time Arkansas didn't do that? They're going to have a couple of games in central Arkansas when you look at Hot Springs and Pine Bluff. We're going to go through all the dates in exhibition season. We just mentioned the fact that practice just ramped up. There's some other talking points in terms of some of the national perception of Arkansas. We know some of these way too early polls, preseason polls, but the closer we get to the season, the less and less that these things are such a far out look that you take them with a grain of salt. All preseason rankings change, and sometimes they get upset and turned inside out. But at the same time, the closer you get to the season, the more you start to buy into some of the ideology that goes behind them. And then the season will reveal what teams are really quality, which ones were pretenders, which one were contenders. Last week when we were on, we really went through the business of the basketball program before we got into recruiting. I'm going to flip it today. We're going to start off with recruiting, though. I set all of that up to say now we're going to jump into recruiting because Arkansas had a big 5-star visitor. It's really the first high school visitor since May. Arkansas only had one. You go all the way back to Calipari and his roster building for this upcoming season. A lot of visitors, transfers, players that he had at Kentucky. You had one holdover, which we didn't, the last guy on board out of the top 9 guys in Trevor Brazil, but all your visitors are really out of the portal except for Darius Acuff Jr. He visited Arkansas back on that weekend of May 10th when DJ Wagner was taking his visit. That's how long ago that was. And it would be a couple of months later, late July, actually, more than 2 months, when Acuff Jr. came off the board publicly. About a couple of weeks before the public announcement, he privately committed to John Calipari. We talked about that. We broke that stuff here. But it had been a while, and then you've seen this kind of wait and build up. Well, part of that is, part of the setup here is that Arkansas only had one home football game in the entire month of September in Fayetteville where you could bring in visitors to experience that fan base atmosphere for a big sporting event. And that was Alabama Birmingham. Even though it was an announced, top 10 crowd of all time, it was still not the same kind of juice that's going to happen when Arkansas starts hosting some of these big SEC matchups against ranked teams as we turn this calendar page in just a few days to October. That was part of it. Now we also know Arkansas's exhibition schedule and where something could land in terms of a basketball event, maybe with bringing visitors in. That's not known publicly yet in terms of the visits we do know about that are out there, because those are on football game weekend so far. So we're going to get through all of it, but Arkansas did have its first weekend visitor or high school visitor over the past weekend since Darius Acuff Jr. back in May. And it turned out there was no home football game. There was no fan atmosphere on campus for that. Arkansas went on the road and took care of business against Auburn in football. And while that was going on, John Calipari and Arkansas's coaching staff was hosting Mika Murnin, the 6'10", pushing 6'11", stretch 4 guy I got to see play in person back in May. Watched his run carefully online, streaming during the Nike E16 Peach Jam Championship run. He was the MVP of that, along with in-state J.J. Andrews, Central Arkansas, another 5-star in that 2026 class. Mika Murnin in 2026. But he arrived on campus over the weekend. He put several items on his social media, on his Instagram account, wearing the Razorback gear. You know how they do it. You know the photo shoots and the little video ops they do, and he put some of that on his social media. So visit confirmed, Arkansas' second high school visitor that we know about that's gone public, and it's another 5-star, a top 10 rated, fifth, number 5 according to ESPN in that 2026 class. Prior to the Arkansas visit, he had taken visits to Utah and to Michigan. He has an upcoming visit to Duke. Right now, that's the only package of 4 visits that I know about. The interesting thing about Mika Murinen is, and we've talked about this, but we're just recovering some ground since he actually made it to campus. We know Arkansas had to cancel or postpone it. We'll see the weekend prior, that UAB football game, the only one in September on the home campus with Koa Pete. We're going to talk about him, class of 2025, 5-star. We'll talk about him in a little bit. So Murinen makes it to campus. I mentioned the other visits. He's a guy, and I've said this before, I'm going to repeat it, quote unquote, a strong candidate to reclass to 2025. Well, we've got the early period coming up. So this could be a situation, I'm told that he may just wait till the end of his season. Well, what does that look like? He's at Arizona Compass Prep. Calipari was out to see him when the recruiting period opened up. Last year he was at Sunrise Christian. So 2 of the top national independent high schools that are out there. But at the end of his season, he has another season still also as a 2026 member of playing grassroots ball. But if he's going to elect to reclass, he's not going to go through the grassroots next season, spring or summer. He'll make a decision on where he's going to play college. And if he's going to reclass, he'll be coming onto a campus. A guy, Will Riley, who played a good part of his grassroots season as a member of this 2025 class, reclass of 2024, but he did go through some grassroots play before he made that decision. So timing's everything. Does Murinen want to get it done and over? He's taking visits now and make a decision. He will reclass. Go ahead and sign somewhere early and obviously play his high school season just like any of the other traditional class of 2025 players are going to do. Maybe some will sign early and then they play their season out. So all of these are question marks. And when does he make that determination to reclass? And where does Arkansas stand in his pecking order? Well, first of all, it's John Calipari. You may get tired of the same talking points, but they're relevant because he's one of those guys to me. This is right in his wheelhouse, not just because he's a 5-star, not just because he's a future pro and looks like a can't miss, but because Calipari will be all about, let's reclass. He's one of those guys that will show him how that can work for him. There's not really an angle that Calipari doesn't have in his bag of goodies when he sets it down on the table and starts showing players what he's done for his past players and what they've been able to accomplish, not only getting drafted, but sticking in the NBA and all those max contracts. He's got the best resume out there in terms of recruiting when it comes to that stuff. And for most players, that's their top priority, is making it to the next level. So we'll repeat all that. We'll say all that now, not repeat it with each one of these players as we go through it, because it's going to apply to everybody. But Murinen's an interesting situation, and he visited Arkansas. You got to get on campus to take that next step. Even with Calipari, there's not going to be any sight unseen commitments. You got to get him in on campus. And this isn't portal recruiting. It's a little bit different. It takes a little bit longer to bake. Even with NIL now, that's a big part of it, obviously, and these high-level guys. But again, ESPN ranks him the number 5 player in the country in class of 2026. And I'm telling you, if he reclasses, he's not going to be bumping around outside the top 10 of the 2025 rankings. I think he's probably one of 3 or 4 players in the class of 2026, if they reclassed, would jump into a top 10 scenario. In this class, a class that's ahead of them technically in terms of their development and age. But Murinen was on the Finnish national team. He's a Finland native. Need to mention that, Mika Murinen. And we're not going to spend a whole lot more time on it other than my player comparison is another Finland big man that is one of the most versatile bigs in the NBA, an NBA All-Star 2 years ago with Utah. A guy that was drafted by the Chicago Bulls after leaving school early from Arizona, 7-footer Lauri Markkanen. There's similarities here, and I think Murinen's one of those next international players when you look at that 6'9", 6'10", 6'11", that can do multiple things. And he's not just a spot-up 3 shooter, but just to give you an example, 21 points in the Peach Jam title game to give Brad Beal a lead at championship. J.J. Andrews had a strong run, including the title game. Murinen just as impressive. Missed the semifinal game with an injury. but was back for the title game, 21 points, MVP. But when you looked at the entire 8 or 9 day run there, 4, 5, or 6 games that Brad Bill Elite played that week leading up to the championship, he averaged 18 points per game. Murin did, but his shooting split 61% from the field overall, 50% on high volume from three. And if you watch this guy, again, I've seen him in person. He's one of those that it's a feathery, soft touch. He doesn't have a lot of wind up or delay with that length and size. He really gets into that shot. He can put the ball on the deck to offset or reset on a hard closeout and get into the mid-range, and he's got craft in there. You look at Grant Nelson and some of the things he did at Alabama. You look at, I mentioned Lauri Markkanen an all-star in the NBA. There's certain player comparisons when you look at a Mika Murin where there's some things he can do outside of just one or two things. And he's athletic. I mean, he's a guy that's going to finish off lob passes. He'll protect the rim. He's an adequate rebounder. He does a good job there. I think at the college level, he's probably a stretch 4. I think at the NBA level, they'll look at opportunities as a 3-4 combo. That's just my projection on him. All right, so we've gone Mika Murin now. We're 11 minutes in. Thanks again. I'm Kevin McPherson, HogvilleNET YouTube Live. If you haven't already done it, please go hit subscribe and like and share the content if you will. But let's move down because that was Arkansas's visitor. Unless there's some sneak surprise with Arkansas playing in the Southwest Classic and in Arlington, big game in football against Texas A&M, 24th ranked Aggies this weekend. Unless Arkansas has another visitor on campus when there's not a football game, the next one we have on the list as we move on is Malik Thomas. Now, this is a already class of 2025. There is no decision to reclass there. I think the sparkle is still with Malik Thomas in Arkansas. I've told you guys that I've got a source that still says when the dust settles with his visits, Arkansas is going to get him. I've got a few more people I talked to. They're not so sure about that. I'm not sold on it. There is not a private commitment on this, but Arkansas, in my opinion, right now is probably, if I was forecasting it, I'd probably have Arkansas with as great as odds as anybody right now. And he's got the October 4th through 6th visit coming up. Arkansas hosts Tennessee on that game date on that Saturday the 5th. So he'll be able to attend that, go to Arkansas practices. Murin at least got to go to basketball practice. Malik Thomas is coming in when it's a full weekend of opportunities to really see what it's like to be in the world of Razorbacks. And I think what's interesting here is I'm looking around the board at some other off cards, and we've gone through some of these talking points about where some of these top-rated 5-star guards, especially at his position, shooting guard, are going to slot in. And we kind of talked about for a while, there's like a handful of schools really zeroing in on a handful of the top 10, 15 rated 5-star guards. And he was one of those. And the idea was, well, they're not all, you're not going to have multiple guys at one place. I'm not sure that that's going to end up being true. First of all, I think Darren Peterson, when the dust settles, is off to Kansas. We've said that. The third player overall rated, 6'4" guard. His dad has told me multiple times he's going to be a lead guard on the college level. We'll see how much of that's true, how much he plays on the ball. I think he's a more natural 2. Darius Acuff Jr., who is an electric scorer, an elite scorer, is also a facilitator. He actually projects as a lead guard. With all his ability, he projects as a 1. Malik Thomas, to me, is a guy you can run your offense through. You can play some ISO ball with him. It's not like it has to be all or nothing at one position. However, again, he is, to me, a more natural fit as a 2. And I think he and Darius Acuff Jr. would actually complement each other in that backcourt. But we're looking at some other players and some of the teams involved. UConn was thought for a while. The projections are still published out there. People haven't changed them yet. We're going to get Malik Thomas after his late June visit, and on the heels of that, he canceled / postponed that Arkansas visit in late June. It turned out to be a postponement. He rescheduled it for the football weekend against Alabama Birmingham, and then that evolved. We talked about it here. Was going to happen was that was going to move out likely to that October 4th through 6th weekend. Keep an eye on it. And sure enough, it did. I confirmed it, tweeted that out. So now we know the weekend and we know what the next. So he's postponed twice. Third time's the charm. We'll see. But he'd previously taken, before ever visiting UConn back in June, he'd visited Auburn, the hometown school, Pittsburgh. Remember, Malik Thomas, 6'4" guard, Pittsburgh native, plays at overtime elite. Calipari's been out to see him. They had a pro day. They've been doing a lot at OTE, and he continues to just, move the needle and impress. The MVP of the Pangos All-American camp, one of the top 2 or 3 rated players coming out of the NBPA Top 100 camp, all of that back in June. And then he just continues to, at these different slam events. He's just a stud. And you understand why Malik Thomas is ranked 6th or 7th. He's in that top 10, depends on the service. Am I still bullish on Caleb Wilson? We're going to get to him. I know I've spent 15 minutes not getting very far because I like to talk about these guys and not just throw their names out there and move on. I want to tell you what I know about them and what's going on. All right. So Malik Thomas, the guy has an Arkansas visit coming up. When he was scheduled to come in for the Birmingham football weekend before last, he also has an upcoming visit this weekend to Alabama. So when his visit to Arkansas was that date, it looked like 2 weeks later, Alabama was going to get the last known visit in that setup. Now, Arkansas is on the other side of the Alabama visit. But what's interesting is Alabama missed on Jasper Johnson. He was off to Kentucky, a Kentucky native, top 15 rated 5-star guard, shooting guard. Okay. So Alabama now is still looking for a lead guard. Alabama's had a couple of commitments. When you look at small forward, combo forward type guys, another big man, a center, has Alabama in his top 5 or 6, going to make an announcement maybe today, Jalen Toombs. So we'll see there. Alabama taking care of frontline, but they're loading up on high school guys. We'll see how Malik Thomas looks at that situation with that upcoming visit. So he'll be on Alabama's campus, scheduled to be this weekend. And then the only visit we know about after that for him is Arkansas. I mentioned Kansas and Kansas State. Kansas has been on his final 7 list, but I think Kansas is getting Darren Peterson. I don't see a world where those guys play together at Kansas. Let's talk about some of these other names. Braylon Mullins, a top-rated guy that's got a Final 3. UConn is among it. He's a shooting guard. He's a sharpshooter. I saw him play on the Adidas 3SSB circuit over the summer for Indiana Elite. Very good player. Arkansas was in contact with him. But Braylon Mullins is down to 3, and UConn is still on that list. Caden Lewis has narrowed his list down to about 4. Kentucky, who was in on him early, and then it looked like momentum for Alabama. Then it looked like momentum for maybe UConn. We'll talk a little bit about UConn here in a little bit, but UConn's still on his list, as is Kentucky, even with Kentucky having Jasper Johnson. Caden Lewis is probably the only other guy in the top 20 or 25 rankings. When I look at him, that I'd say, okay, maybe he could complement a 2-guard and play as a combo and play a lot of the 1 outside of A Cup Jr., who I think is a better fit as a facilitating 1 than an Caden Lewis is. All right. So UConn is still in play, coming down here with visits with some of these guys and where they fit in the pecking order with both Braylon Mullins and Caden Lewis, 2 highly rated guards. And so maybe you look at that and say, okay, it makes kind of sense maybe why things have seemed to drift with Malik Thomas and UConn. I have not resigned that UConn is completely out of the Malik Thomas thing because of how things can change. But I have told you guys, I've reported this, I've got a source that said UConn has not been putting NIL offers out for some of these guys that some of the other schools are. And maybe they feel like their branding where it is right now, that they can hedge their bets a little bit and offer some other value because of the exposure you get playing for that school right now, especially in March. And other players have been able to catapult some of that for some NBA draft success. I think with Calipari, again, it always comes back to, I don't just get guys drafted. I don't just get them drafted early. I don't just get multiple guys drafted early. Look at the long-term contracts, look at all the money they made, and look at the max contracts. There's no one that can bring those things to the table like he can. So we kind of shuffle around going back to Malik Thomas. It's why I think once you get him on campus, I said this last week, I'm going to repeat it. You get him on campus, Malik Thomas, I think favor Arkansas now. I move the needle more that if he actually makes this visit, he's postponed twice. And I still leave Alabama now because Alabama, again, frontline centered so far on commitments in terms of that, but backcourt guys, and we know guards are very important in any scenario, but at Alabama, they've had a lot of success. The one thing I'll say about Nate Oates, when I look at some of the guys they've had drafted, some of the guards, some of the high-level 5-star guards or high-level guards that he's recruited have not, just talking 1s and 2s, have not exactly splashed in volume at the NBA level. Some of them were drafted in the lottery, and it's kind of been bust city for some of those guys. So that's just something to keep an eye on. Not saying that he's not recruiting well, because he is. He continues to land 5-star players from the high school level. But I'm just throwing that out there because John Calipari's got a much better resume when it comes to front court, back court. Doesn't matter. I'm just saying, I'm throwing that out there. But Malik Thomas will make his own decision. He's got that Bama visit. I think the only other things I would throw out there is he has Kansas State on his list. Would he then maybe later schedule a visit there? Just because a visit's not known now doesn't mean that he's not planning to go, that the one's actually a date's been picked, it's just not been announced. Just throwing that in there. The hometown school, Pittsburgh, maybe kind of a dark horse. I doubt that's what happens, but stranger things have happened. But there's the situation with Malik Thomas. Again, a very good source I have believes Arkansas is in the lead there. When the dust settles, they'll get him. And I'm inclined to think if he gets through that Alabama visit and then ends up visiting Arkansas, I think advantage Calipari. Not to say that seals it, but at the same time, you're out here knocking heads against really good coaches and programs. UConn and Alabama, 2 Final Four teams. UConn back-to-back national titles, and Alabama's kind of been the king of the SEC these last few years, and got to the program's first Final Four. Let's move on. So that's the October 4th through 6th visit weekend. The next, really, Arkansas has a bye week in the middle of October there. So you've got October 5th is when they host Tennessee. Then you're off the following weekend. And before we knew the exhibition dates, which we're going to get to, I was always thinking, well, that off date for football would be a perfect place. Maybe if you could squeeze in that Kansas game there. Well, we learned last week, Kansas is October 25th. Not going to happen. Maybe a red-white game on that weekend and make a big deal of that and bring visitors in. Well, there's not going to be a red-white or inter-squad scrimmage game in Fayetteville this year. We just said that. So you've got an off week. But what you have after that is Arkansas's back at home for a football game against LSU the weekend of October 18th to the 20th. And Arkansas, as it stands now, we know things are fluid and visit dates change and things happen. Arkansas's got several more 5-star players coming in. Top 10 rated Chris Sinak Jr., the 6'10", pushing 6'11". I always say that because these guys continue to grow and get stronger. But another stretch 4 versatile guy, top 10 rated 5-star in the class of 2025. I've said multiple times, here's a guy on his final 12 list, 7 SEC schools. He just visited Auburn. He visited Houston a few weeks ago. Keep an eye on that. LSU is many people think he's the favorite. I've said that for a while. Kentucky has felt good about getting him. So we'll see what happens there. But he's got multiple visits set up, including Arkansas, for that October 18th to the 20th weekend. Talked to his AAU director. We talked about this a week ago on Wednesday after I'd visited with him. And he says Arkansas with Calipari, that's the attraction. And I kind of pondered the idea. Well, he grew up in the SEC country down there in that New Orleans, Baton Rouge area. He's got 7 SEC teams on his final 12. Maybe Arkansas already had a little shine with him before Calipari. Maybe that just adds to it, obviously. So we'll see. We'll see what Arkansas is able to do there. NIL money. Some of these guys, that could be a tilting point, especially once you get them on campus and Calipari really rolls out. This is what this looks like. And Calipari and associate head coach Chen Coleman last week were out to, or was it this week? Last week, man, the days are running together. I think it was last week. We're out to see him at Link Academy right up the street from Fayetteville in Branson, Missouri. That's where he's playing this season. So also who will be taking a visit is Kingston Flemings, a 6'3", really, to me, now he's ranked now inside the top 20. Some of these rankings continue to update. A 6'3" lead guard out of San Antonio. I think he's ranked 18th in the composite rankings, top 20 according to 247's individual rankings. So either way you chop it up, this is a 5-star guy. But Kingston Flemings is, from what I've seen of him and then what I hear some of these analysts that cover it nationally, they think he may be the best facilitator first guard that's out there. He was on Team USA's 3-on-3 FIBA World Cup team just a few weeks ago, played over in Europe. And we know that he's down. He had Arkansas on his final 5 list. And I reported this. I still haven't tweeted it. I haven't seen this anywhere else, but a couple of weeks ago, Arkansas head coach John Calipari and assistant coach Chuck Martin were in San Antonio to see him. And it was about the time where he put out his intentions to actually visit Arkansas on this October 18th to the 20th weekend. So 2 5-stars in the 2025 class. Chris Sinek Jr., Kingston Fleming's on campus. Fleming's has Arkansas along with Gonzaga, and then 3 Texas schools: Texas Tech, and I believe it's Baylor. I don't want to butcher that, but he's got he's got was it Houston or Baylor? Now I've gone blank on that. But he's got 3 Texas schools: Arkansas and Gonzaga. I didn't write that part down. I usually memorize it, and I just drew a little blank there. But he's got the Arkansas visit, and from the visits he's got scheduled so far, I think Arkansas is the last one. Doesn't necessarily mean anything good or bad. But I'll tell you this, with Darius Acuff Jr., you're saying, okay, but he's a lead guard. You just talked about guys complementing each other. How does that complement? Well, I think we've seen with Calipari last year at Kentucky, you've got multiple guys that were projecting lead guard at the next level, and some even at the college level that were lead guards, and some that were maybe twos projecting forward that you could run a lot of stuff through because of their ability to create. And you saw multiple guys, 4 guys last year, even DJ Wagner included, dealing with an injury, transferred to Arkansas, but then 3 others that are off to the NBA. And so you look at DJ Wagner, mentioned his name, and this season, Boogie Fland, I think there'll be times, even though those are Arkansas's 1-2, however it works out at your lead guard spot, will also be able to play beside each other. We're going to talk rotation here a little bit when I get into some of the personnel. I really wanted to get into some of the personnel stuff I've been hearing. I think you're going to like that. I hope you hang with me because I'm already about a half hour in. I always go long on this stuff. But having said that, they're not afraid to go over. Traditionally, over the years, I just mentioned last year at Kentucky and with this Arkansas roster, some of these position similarities that it really won't matter because of the way Calipari does it. But over the years, he's put guys on the court that you could argue are in other circumstances are battling for playing time, or battling for exposure, or battling for production. And then it hurts the guy that loses out there. So players try to, not with, we've seen it work at other places, not just with Cal, but Cal does a really good job of that. I say all of that. I went through that rabbit hole to say, look, these are not backup. There's not plan Bs. When you're recruiting 5-stars constantly, you have to cast, even with 5-stars, it's a relative smaller group, but it's still a bit of a wide net because you're not going to just zero in on 1, 2, or 3 guys, even if your intention is to only take 3, maybe 4. I would argue this 2025 class is so good. If you could get 5 guys in that top 15, maybe a couple of guys that are outside of it, we'll talk about here in a second, you go ahead and expand it a little bit this time. But Calipari may stick to 3 or 4, but you still are going to bring, we've already gone through some of the names. You've had 2 on campus so far. 1 guy's committed, Mika Mirden. We'll see if he decides to reclass or stay put. But they got more guys coming in. All right, so those are your 2 2025 5-stars coming in the weekend of the 18th and the 20th. One more visitor scheduled right now, J.J. Andrews, class of 2026, ESPN 15th ranked player in the country, 5-star, 6'7" wing, small forward out of Little Rock Christian Academy. Was with Mika Mirden. I mentioned that, winning Bradville Elite, the program's first and only Peach Jam championship, but it was on the 16 under level. Didn't matter. That team would have beat some of the 17s. That's how good it was. J.J. Andrews, he's got 5 visits planned, already taken the Missouri visit. He's got LSU, North Carolina State, and Marquette at various times. The Marquette visit he just added, that's going to be after the first of the year. But again, 2026, he's got a ways to go before he needs to make a commitment announcement. But he's going to visit Arkansas the same weekend as Sinek and Fleming. So you got 3 guys coming in that weekend. The red-white game, we're going to talk exhibition schedule and jump back to some of this. Caleb Wilson's the next name. Everybody's wondering about that. I've gone from Arkansas if he had to commit back in early July to mid-July. It would be Arkansas if he had to do it then, but it's a long way to go, and a lot of schools are going to be after him. We've seen the Kentucky visit now, a lot of hype around that. He and Caden Lewis on social media talking about hooking up and playing in Lexington. But that visit's come and gone. He hasn't made any commitments. He's got some other visits set up. I've told you guys for a while that I still think Arkansas is either the leader, and I've got sources multiple that think Arkansas still is the leader. I've got one guy that thought Arkansas was a leader and now thinks it might be Kentucky. I mean, I've got a lot of opinions on this, and these are good sources. These are not rumor mongers, so that's good. I've given you a lot of info from my interview with him about communicating with Acuff a while back about playing together in college. So we know he's talking to players about it because he's done it on social media, and that was something else. I've told you that his dad, who's a decision maker guy handling his recruitment, is a big Calipari guy. But we've also talked about the clutch agency angle and Rich Paul and some maybe a little friction there from public comments Paul made about Calipari over the Chris Livingston situation, a recent player Cal had at Kentucky whose draft stock fell. I think for a variety of reasons that don't really point to Cal, and I would have said that if Calipari were still at Kentucky. But whatever. I mean, there's different opinions. Mine's not the only one. What I will say with Caleb Wilson is Arkansas, I've said this, Arkansas has a visit date set up with him. I always told you it would be post-September. He was considering that September mid-date, but it was going to end up being, at least in October. That could change too. There's still an opportunity to visit in November if you were even going to sign early. That early period, I think, runs the 13th to the 20th. Arkansas hosts Ole Miss on that first weekend in November, so a couple of weeks before that, and it's still a live recruiting period where a player could come and do that. So you've got different opportunities. You've got that Kansas exhibition game. Arkansas that weekend, October 25th, is a Friday night charity exhibition. Arkansas hosts Kansas. That's going to be huge. In football, the next day, the Razorbacks are on the road at Mississippi State. So you have the campus to yourself and the possibility that if anything shifts with anybody, that it can land on that weekend. That might be an opportunity to do that. All right, so we've really, kind of hit on several things here with Caleb Wilson. So in summation with him, I think Arkansas is still at the top. They may not be alone up there. We might be seeing a situation where there's a couple or three other schools that are right there with a chance to, change the order of things. But I think Arkansas is still up there. And based on, if I'm trying to weigh the concerns of some versus some positive things I still get, I still favor Arkansas right now. So that's where we're at. We've got Acuff Jr. in the house. If Arkansas gets Malik Thomas, and I think if he makes it on campus, advantage Arkansas at that point, and I'm probably moving closer to the idea that I'm going to go ahead and project him to Arkansas. If that happens, this is the best backcourt in recruiting, period. End of story. I don't care what anybody else does. You've got two top 6, top 7 rated 5-star guards that will complement each other. And you've already locked up a backcourt that to me looks like one and done, off to the NBA after one season. Those guys are that good. We saw that at Arkansas a couple of years ago. When you looked at Anthony Black and Nick Smith Jr., you had some stuff that held Nick Smith Jr. back in terms of being available to Arkansas, a team that ended up going to Sweet 16, a very young team. And that's why I think Calipari understands, even if I can get 4 of these high-level 5-star guys, maybe they would stretch it to 5. But that's going to be half. If you're only going to go 9 deep in your true rotation, then you've tilted the thing again to where you've got more freshmen than you do veteran guys. So maybe he says, man, as tempting as it is, I'm going to stick to 3 or 4. But if you get Malik Thomas and Darius Acuff Jr., that's going to be the best backcourt in this recruiting class. Period. End of story. I don't think that one's debatable. There'll be other schools and fan bases and some of these guys that need to get content out that will debate it. I'm telling you right now, I've seen these guys play. I've seen all of them. You get those two together, boom, it's over. You add Caleb Wilson to that, I've said over and over, he is the best two-way player, offense, defense, at 6'9", top 5 rated 5-star out of Atlanta, plays at Holy Innocents. Calipari made a priority, first player he saw when he went out to see players on the current recruiting period. But to me, Caleb Wilson, you put him with Malik Thomas, and if it works out that way, because I think Arkansas still leads there. If I'm wrong about that, it's and there's more to it than I know right now. I still think Arkansas is right there if they're not fully in the lead. Going back again to Malik Thomas, it's one of those situations where Arkansas is in the top, in my opinion, 2. Maybe it's top 3, but I think Arkansas, once that visit happens, if that is consummated, look out. And again, you put those 3 together, Arkansas's got the best recruiting class in the country. I know the Boozer twins, wherever they go, Duke's doing a really good job. Koa Pete, who didn't make the visit to Arkansas in mid-September during that Alabama-Birmingham game as planned. What I was told was he's going to reschedule later. Maybe that's something that happens. There's some talk swirling that's just not going to happen. We'll see. I'm not sold on that. I rarely get to 100% certainty on anything. I'm not into absolutes, but in recruiting's weird. 5-star recruiting, especially, Now NIL is obviously a big part of it. But, just looking at Sean Abayev, a top 30 rated player that I've talked a lot about on here. Chuck Martin has been, speaking of Kingston Flemings, heavily involved with him, heavily involved with Sean Abayev for a while. Abayev, a 6'7", I call him you could call him a point forward if you're going to play him on the ball. But it's certainly a wing. You could call him a combo guard. He's pushing 6'8". Just a versatile guy. Just blew up in July. Had that big Under Armour Next Elite 24 All-Star game. He was the MVP. 22 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds. I watched him in that game and just had his way, but he played on the ball and was setting guys up. I mean, that's how you get 22 points and 10 assists. He was picking and choosing. But I interviewed him recently, and he said, look, I want to visit Arkansas. He's taken a ton of visits. I think he just visited Auburn. Syracuse is in the mix. A lot of schools. He's taken a lot of visits, actually. And he's got more he wants to take. But he told me he wanted to visit Arkansas. He was just waiting on Cal and Chuck, the way he worded it with me, to kind of get that ball rolling. And they did. They went and saw him. Martin had already been out to see him when the recruiting period opened up. And then Calipari was off to see him with Martin again just a few days ago. So we'll see if a visit is announced coming from Abayev. We mentioned Cole Pete. Let's see what happens there. It's looking less and less likely. Maybe this late in the game if he's going to sign early. He's a guy we've talked about, though, that may wait. He may drag it out and wait to the spring if that's the case, depending upon how other things land with Arkansas and some of these other guys. Because a Koa Pete and a Caleb Wilson and even a Chris Sinak Jr., who's probably a stretch 4, and maybe could play some 5 at the college level, but those guys may be looking at maybe not landing at the same, wanting to compete with each other. But again, Calipari does a great job of showing guys, well, look, this is going to be your reality the further you go. Doing it this way for one season at the college level doesn't really help you. It might hurt you in terms of learning how to play with other guys that maybe they're going to come in and play some at the same position you are, and vice versa. You've got some flexibility, versatility in the way that you do things. We need to start embracing it. I think Calipari does a great job of showing high-level guys why it makes sense to play at the same place. And the other name I'll throw out is the in-state kid that does have an offer from Calipari, Isaiah Seeley. He's in constant contact with Arkansas, and we'll see where that goes. We'll see when he ends up visiting. Arkansas and Chuck Martin, speaking of Chuck Martin, Jalen Montanati, a top 20 rated player in the class of 2020 in Owasso, Oklahoma. Been a big contributor to Team USA's junior national team at his age level the past few springs and summers. But a big time player again. Mocan elite on the Nike EYBL circuit, 16 and under, with Jacob Lanier, an in-state kid that Arkansas has interest in. But Montanati, Chuck Martin was out to see him yesterday, or was it the day before? I think it was yesterday. I tweeted that out last night. He told me he did. And then he wants to come back. He has taken an unofficial visit to Arkansas in the past, last season, and told me that he'd be interested in doing that again soon here in the fall. So we'll see with Montanati, but his 6'7" wing out of Owasso, again, top 20 rated 5-star player, really good player and a sniper. This dude's one of the snipers out there. All right, so let's wrap up recruiting. Almost 40 minutes in, I wore it out. Let's get into some of the players and now in the exhibition season. But let's talk about, before we go into that exhibition schedule, I really want to talk about some of the players that I've been hearing really good things about. I want to get into. I'm seeing the comments come over. I'm just at a point here where I'm not able to get to them cleanly and even read them. So let's get into some of the players that I've been hearing some really good things about. When you have a top 9 rotation, you've got so many guys that were highly rated, regardless of their situation. Guys that came with Cal, guys that Cal recruited to Kentucky and will be freshmen. Trevor Brazil, the one guy that's returning. The 2 big portal names that popped around the country, Nelly Davis and Jonas Adu, because of their resumes and because of their value when they went in the portal, how they were ranked and looked at. And so there's no surprises that they're going to be standouts. I really haven't heard anything negative. But just recently, the names that keep coming back to me are Nelly Davis, Adu Thero. Watch out for this guy, because that name keeps coming back about what people are seeing in practices. And now they've expanded practice. Boogie Flan, DJ Wagner. And here's one for you in the top 5 names I've heard recently, Billy Richmond. I'm not saying that someone ranked him that way, but those were the names that are coming out kind of consistently. So I'm thinking about that. I'm having some of these conversations and I'm thinking about some of this stuff that I'm getting. Nelly Davis surprises no one. Adu Thiero is projected, had mock projections for as a first rounder after this season. But he's a guy that needs to expand his game a little bit on the perimeter, I think, get more consistent from three, which then will help increase his volume if he's knocking them down, your confidence level in him taking those shots. And then that opens things up because he's an explosive guy. We've seen Calipari talk about putting him in short roll situations as a screener in a two-man game, and why that matters. When you screen high, and you got guards like DJ Wagner, who's a set-up first guy. At least he was as a freshman. And Boogie Fland, who's a combo, probably more of a scoring lead guard, but a guy that's going to facilitate for sure. But they're high IQ guys, and they understand when you start working on this two-man stuff, it's so much about where do you set it? How do guys release off of it? What are their strengths and weaknesses in terms of getting a good screen? How much of it is an actual screen, or you slip it quick because you want to use that athleticism and quickness to create a numbers advantage and get some space with the defender that's having to deal with that two-man. But the one thing about Thiero that Calipari really likes is how effective he is getting to the rim as a slasher, because he at 6'8", he's long enough and big enough that he's got big strides, he's got quickness and explosiveness, and so the shallow roll makes sense because you trust him enough when he catches that ball just maybe above the elbow, somewhere in the free throw circle as he's approaching the elbow, and you get him on a fast track now. Now it's really hard to defend him. He's a guy that can finish with power at the rim, explosiveness, or maybe put a soft floater up or something if need be. But they really like his versatility playing those shallow rolls. Because, until he proves to be a better three-point shooter, you may not envision him right now as much in a pop game off of that, popping out. But I'm not saying that won't happen. I'm just saying those shallow rolls, the reason you do those is if you're not popping, you hit that shallow roll, and that's a focus. You're wanting to take a guy, but take advantage of the guys, use his best skills to your advantage. And then the hard rolls are typically more reserved for what you see with the big men, because on a hard roll all the way, you can throw up, throw above, and you'll be able to do some of that with Thiero too. But I think his name has really been popping. Calipari mentioned it at the end of summer workouts as a guy that's been really good, and I just continue to hear it as a theme from former players that have been in the house, different places I'm getting it from, people that are seeing it, putting eyeballs on this stuff. Boogie Fland and DJ Wagner, I continue to hear they're standing out. DJ Wagner, look, I think a minimum expectation here. Is this is a steady floor general, which there's nothing wrong with that because there's a lot of talent around him. I think does he have a high floor? Is he a high ceiling guy still? He's been dealing with the ankle injury, but at minimum, let's just say he has a high floor. Here's a guy that was, I think last year was a near 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, or better than 2-to-1. I'm trying to remember the exact numbers on it, but he was really good as a true freshman and dealing with that injury. The shooting efficiency was an issue. 10 points a game, and nearly 3.5 assists per game. So yeah, I think he was a 3-to-1 assist ratio guy, or better than that, nearly 3.5 maybe. But the good news here is that I keep hearing good things about him, and there's leadership qualities, and I'm hearing about this. Viewed as a veteran guard, well, if Boogie Fland's a true freshman, of course, out of those two, that's the case. But more and more in college basketball, a second-year player, depending upon their ability to stay on the floor because of their effectiveness, and especially at the lead guard spot, if they're getting guys in the right place, if they're getting the offensive flow generated the right way because of their leadership, that's a veteran player in this world of college athletics. And so this could be a really big boon for Arkansas. I think Boogie Fland, Calipari said back in that post-summer workout press conference that here's a guy that's better than he thought he was. Said the same thing about Trevor Brazile. I think it's important to remember when you're listening to these things, I think that it means that he sees these guys as being able to help. I don't think he throws out those things. But even since then, I continue to hear that Boogie Fland is just he does things that make you feel like he's going to have an important role on a very good team. Not an important role as a true freshman by default, but an important role because he's good enough to have it on a team that's projected to be really good. to me, context matters. And so we're going to get into some of the national stuff that's bubbled up here recently in terms of these preseason thoughts from some of the major national guys, at least a couple of them. But I think those 5 names, just continue to hear again, Nelly Davis, I think for obvious reasons, the number 1 player in the transfer portal. He just continues to open eyes and some of the things he can do. I think the defensive end is the area where a guy like him has the potential to be really good. He's a strong rebounder. That's part of your defense if you're getting on that glass as a 6'4" guard. But I think other things. But I think when you look at the total package of Nelly Davis, here's a guy to me that should be in discussion as not only preseason potential. He's not going to be ahead of guys like Mark Sears and Janai Broome or maybe Wade Taylor-Ford, who have been through those SEC wars on really good teams. And they're going to be the top 3 names predicted for player of the year. Probably Mark Sears be the number 1 guy there. But Nelly Davis has that kind of ability, in my opinion, to be a guy like that. And I just continue to hear good things about him. So the Billy Richmond part's what I want to get to. His name keeps surfacing. He's a guy I've said all along, he'll obviously be in that top 9 rotation, but I've said all along, in some way there seems to be to me a pathway for him to be, if not a plus, if only a plus defender, but he'll at least get there at some point, maybe elite defender. But at 6'5", 6'6" on the wing, the guy's explosive. He is a vicious slasher. He's a lefty. His mid-range shot is probably his strong suit when he's not finishing at the rim. And 3-point shooting's a work in progress. I continue to hear really good things about him and his work ethic and some of the possibilities of him giving himself a chance to not only be in that top 9 rotation, but maybe have maybe more of an impact than we might have projected. It's hard to say when you've only got a top 9 and you don't really have depth beyond that of guys that are serviceable that you could see have an impact. It's hard to rule out anybody in the top 9 of the quality of these guys. I think the point here is that the more you hear Richmond's name, the more you realize, as good as Boogie Flan's been talked about, being a McDonald's All-American and a top 15 rated 5-star, and even Carter Knox because of his offense and some of the things he did at Overtime Elite last year. Carter Knox, I've heard continue to hear good things about him. Nothing negative other than we saw the photo. I wanted to get to this, and then I'm going to go into rotation, but I want to get into this. We saw the photo with boots a few weeks ago with Nolan. We knew Lawson Blake's loss for the season. He was in a boot expected, and it was all right foot, right leg boots, walking boots. We saw Big Z and we saw Jonas Adu. And then the social media that the men's basketball program continued to crank out showed photo. You see a lot of Big Z in some of the photos and some of the drill work. And for a while, not as much Jonas Adu. But in the last several video clips I've seen, there's Jonas Adu. And one of the keys is, one of the things, the idea was, well, he was limited in practice. Well, the videos and the content that I've seen recently in the last 7 days, a couple of different videos, cut-ups, he's playing defense. One of the hardest things to do on a lower leg injury, if you're doing anything minimal or scaled down, would be to be in defensive drills because it's a reaction drill in it. And sometimes for players challenged with injuries, that's the harder part of the game to get back to with timing, strength, and confidence. And then sometimes if they're bringing you along slowly, you might not be doing defensive drills right away. You might want the first steps and the first movements, even if you're going through some drills, to be proactive stuff where you're the offensive guy, where you're moving, what you're doing, and you're not reacting as much. So to see him in defensive drills, closing out on the perimeter, guarding down in the low block, seen some of that. And so the idea now is we've seen, going back to that photo before this last few days, mentioning seeing Jonas Adu, we've seen Big Z for a couple of weeks now and a lot of the content that's come out. So unless there's some trickery when they're using old footage to drive some of this narrative at practice, that'd be the only thing, but I don't think that's the case. I do have some information that I have to keep off the record about it. And of course, I don't speak in specifics in terms of injuries unless the players or the universities or their families clear that in terms of academics or injuries. But when you see a photo with players wearing boots, I'm not going to talk in specifics of injuries, but it becomes kind of obvious that it's likely some lower leg issue, whether mild, not a big deal. Maybe the boot stuff's more precautionary, but we don't even have to right now. I think we're more now in terms of thinking about how do these guys stay healthy because we're seeing them practice. And I mentioned just seeing a dude going through defensive drills. To me, that's a big deal. It maybe signals that he's getting closer to being the kind of guy that Arkansas looked at bringing in an all SEC defender, an all SEC second team guy, a guy that destroyed the Razorbacks at Bud Walton last year. A big 20-plus point, 10-plus rebound, double-double, and then helped Tennessee not only win the SEC outright, but get to an Elite Eight. What's now so just acknowledging that it looks like he's in some relative good enough health to practice. We now start talking about, okay, here comes the exhibition season. How healthy is Arkansas to get through that? I think based on just seeing some of this footage, if it's real, if it's recent, if the footage that was put out recently is from recent practices, I think it bodes well for Arkansas moving into October as things ramp up for the regular season. But let's go into rotation real quick. And I wanted to get through the player stuff first. I'm still with this. I said this for a while. I think for me, and based on their abilities, and some of these guys are multi-positional ability, but for me, the top 5 guys are still, and it's a combination of things. It's not just necessarily their projected next level talent, but experience, talent, and then positional value. But for me, it's still DJ, Nelly, Adu Thiero as a 3-4 combo at the 3, Trevor and Brazil as a stretch 4, and then Jonas Adu at the 5. This is based on their experience levels, their value to what they've done in college so far, and how their potential and what their roles could project for this coming season. But I then backed off of that the last time we really talked about rotation, only to acknowledge a couple of things. One is Arkansas is thin at the front line, and we've seen guys in boots. All right, so I want to get to the boot part to establish where I think we are with that. But still, you got a thin front line, and we already saw in preseason some idea of how quickly your numbers dwindle on that front line. And so if Adu Thiero is your 3-4 and he's your 4th frontline guy in theory and Thiero, that means based on those 5 I mentioned, you've got 3 of your 4 guys in that starting group, which means, a couple of guys picking up an early couple of fouls, and now it changes who you have to be for a while or long stretches of the game. Plus, in concert with that, you've got the fact that Calipari always has a freshman in the starting lineup. And I don't know, I'd have to probably go back and really dig to see where that hasn't been the case in recent years. And Arkansas's got some really good ones that can do this and can be in a situation like that. So that combination, and it happens to be that the freshmen are backcourt players / guards, wings / and so that helps you also bring one of these big men I just mentioned in that first 5 group, one of those 3, play them off the bench and figure out how you want to rotate things. I think at the end of the day, Billy Richmond is a guy to really keep an eye on in terms of, being a guy that a few weeks ago I would have said, well, if a freshman's going to start, it's either going to be probably Boogie Fland or Carter Knox. That may still be true, but I think Billy Richmond, the more and more I hear, I'm not ruling out, not saying he'll start, but that he'll have that kind of minutes role. Whereas I thought for a while maybe he and Big Z in that top 9 rotation would maybe be the 8th and 9th guys. Billy Richmond's making a case that maybe someone else will be in that 8 or 9 spot. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I'm just telling you, keep an eye on it. And then the more we've seen of Big Z and not as much of Jonas Adu, this guy's doing work. The clips I see are very impressive. He's added good weight, as is Trevor and Brazil. They look stronger. One of my concerns was physicality on the front line. At least these guys are bigger than I've seen them in the past. You expected that. Certainly with Big Z going into year 2. With Trevor Brazil, this is a veteran guy in terms of his age and how many years he's been in college. And he's always kind of had the same build until now. He looks bigger. He looks stronger to me in the upper body. I think all of this bodes well for Arkansas. So the top 9, top 8, top 9 rotation, there's not guys outside of that we're going to look at and go, oh boy, they're making a charge. They didn't recruit that. He didn't recruit for that. Calipari continues to talk about it. I've got a top 8 or 9. He said now it's 9 with Brazil. So it's not that that's going to change, but who within that top 9 gives changes the dynamics for themselves, which will impact someone else and maybe their minutes. Calipari is a master of getting guys to buy into their roles. It hasn't translated in postseason recently, but they were been consistently good, even in the SEC, in one of the best conferences in the country, and is a top-rated program in the country. And so I expect this Arkansas team, kind of looking around this, I still think those are your top 5 guys, but I do think one of those 3 freshmen. Now, I would have said 2 a few weeks ago and did. Now that we're talking rotation, I think any of those 3 freshmen potentially could slide in as a starter if you wanted to do it a different way that way. Big Z, I still think, is on the outside looking in a starting role if Jonas Adu is healthy and ready to go. That doesn't mean that I don't I look at Big Z as a future NBA player, potential first rounder, but just based on the body of work to this point, Adu, to me, that's a job that he'd have to lose. And we see how things play out, but I think he's still entrenched in that top 5 if he's ready to go. And it's encouraging to see the fact that he's practicing now. Let's get to Arkansas's exhibition schedule real quick. It starts really, this is not an exhibition game, but it's part of that October season. Arkansas has a pro day in October every year. It's October 9th. All 30 NBA teams, Calipari said, will be represented. Kentucky pro days, any Calipari pro day, you got multiple pros out there because of the way he recruits. So they're licking their chops. And so I can't wait for some of the feedback from some of my NBA agent contacts. And I'm salivating right now just to not only know that the pro day is just so close here, a couple of weeks out, but I can't wait to get some of this feedback and get as much out there as I can on it. But that kicks off your October slate of events. Arkansas is going to have 2 intra-squad scrimmages. They're calling them tip-off tour events, back-to-back days, October 12th in Hot Springs at Bank OZK Arena there, where the state high school basketball championship games are played every year. So that's on October 12th. A day later, on October 13th, that's a Sunday. October 12th, a Saturday. October 13th, the Sunday, Arkansas is at the Pine Bluff Convention Center to play the second of the tip-off tour event intra-squad scrimmages. So you got back-to-back days with those, we'll call them red-white games, what we used to refer to them as, and they're spreading the love, bringing it back to Central Arkansas. No red-white game, no intra-squad scrimmage game on campus this time around. Interesting. Arkansas's exhibition schedule, when you start talking about really getting close to the season, Kansas, that's going to be monster at Bud Walton Arena on October 25th. Again, that's a Friday night. Football Hogs out of town. Mississippi State in Starkville that weekend on Saturday. So you got Friday night, you got the campus. We'll see if there's any visitors brought into that. But I think the interesting thing here is this is the first of 3 games in a 15-day span against Big 12 teams. 2 of them are exhibition games. We know the Baylor game will be the capper in the regular season for this 15-day span. But you start with Kansas at home on that for that exhibition game. We know Hunter Dickinson is a name that's been around since he was at Michigan, one of the higher-paid NIL guys, still in the college game. Big time situation for Jonas Adu to match up again against a player like that. We know as good as Adu was last year, there were some hurdles for him when he matched up with the Zach Edey. That's true for most frontline guys that Zach Edey took advantage of at very high levels in most of those situations. Hunter Dickinson's a mountain and brings his own challenges. So this is an opportunity for Jonas Adu to kind of measure him in that game. That's one of the things we're keeping an eye on. KJ Adams, a guy I covered back when he helped Team Griffin win the Nike E16 Peach Jam Championship many moons ago, a player that Arkansas's previous coaching staffs recruited, and a guy that ended up at Kansas and played against Arkansas as a part of a defending national championship team that was the number 1 seed. Arkansas upset the Jayhawks in that game last time these teams met. We know that 2 years ago, and moving on to the Sweet 16. But KJ Adams is back on that team. There's some other really good players, as you know, that Bill Self has in the fold. You got 2 blue blood coaches in Self and Calipari. You know, you go back to that title game where Memphis should have sealed the deal back when Calipari was still at Memphis and Bill Self in Kansas, and Mario Chalmers with the shot, and Memphis Tigers missing a ton of free throws down the stretch while they had a multiple possession lead in the closing minute or so. Ended up losing that game. But so there's history on the biggest stages of college basketball between these coaches, Kansas and Kentucky. Of course, Arkansas's got nothing to be bashful about. We just said Arkansas beat the defending national champion Kansas Jayhawks just 2 years ago in the NCAA tournament as a number 1 seed. So Arkansas is a blue blood, according to John Calipari. I agree with him. Man, we're about to roll a full hour here. We're going to get through the rest of this pretty quickly. After that, Arkansas, after hosting that game, it should be a good test for Arkansas. It should be wild in there. The Purdue game last year was wild, big time atmosphere. This could be a scenario to me that even takes it to another level. That's hard to imagine. This is going to have, like last year's team did, that kind of mega matchup, regular season matchup feeling, even though it won't count to net, it won't count on the record. Arkansas wasn't able to use that Purdue game last year to build any kind of momentum as a team. It was a disaster season, but that's not to say in this new context and situation that Arkansas won't get a lot of value out of this and help a team that's going to be projected top 10 to 15 range moving forward. Then you've got a full week later on Friday, November 1st, Arkansas goes on the road to Dallas-Fort Worth, to Fort Worth. That's where TCU's campus is, another Big 12 school, and you've now got a road game in the exhibition season like you did 2 years ago with all those freshmen that made it eventually to the Sweet 16. Arkansas got waxed at Texas, close through the first half. The wheels fell off early in the second half. I was there covering that game. So I've covered not only the Texas exhibition game, but Purdue last year in Bud Walton Arena. I'm actually going to try to make it and cover both of these games in exhibition. I think they're important. I think Kansas can help Arkansas. That road test against TCU does a couple of things for you. One is it's another high-quality team. And what's different about this one is Arkansas is playing 2 high major programs in exhibition season, whereas in the past couple of years when they did play Texas on the road or Purdue at home, they still had a D2 exhibition. I'm all in on get rid of that. I know it helps those schools. There's maybe a little financial boon there. And it's good to help the smaller schools, but it's also good to help yourself. And I think it helps Arkansas to go test itself at TCU, a road environment, a true road environment. But you're also traveling to Dallas-Fort Worth, and you're going to be doing that basically 8 days later in your regular season because November 1st or Friday, you're at TCU, another charity exhibition game, back-to-back Big 12 teams to help you get ready for the regular season. You open at home a few days later, going from Friday to Wednesday of the next week, November 6th, against a Lipscomb team that's well coached and almost beat Arkansas last year in North Little Rock. But you open with Lipscomb. Is that a trap game? Well, I mean, I don't think, anything can happen in college basketball. Mid-majors are designed to beat. It just happens all the time. However, it's your season opener. Yeah, it's sandwiched in there against 3 Big 12 meetings. But Arkansas needs to take care of business against Lipscomb. I think they will. There'll be a lot of excitement at Bud Walton Arena. And then you're back in Dallas-Fort Worth on November 9th on a Saturday, 8 days after TCU, 15 days after you played on a Friday against Kansas. 15-day span, 3 Big 12 teams. Big 12, arguably the best league in college basketball consistently spanning the last several years. I think these exhibition tests matter. I think it'll help Arkansas. And now you've got Baylor, who'll probably be ranked similarly to Arkansas, anywhere in the 10 to 15 range. Who knows which team will be rated higher, but those should be 2 ranked teams and will be. There will be 2 ranked teams in week 1 going into that matchup. So it's already a heavyweight bout in Dallas and a neutral site game at that point. Waco's not too far from Dallas, but Arkansas's got a lot of fans in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as it is. It's an easy get to for in-state fans as it is. American Airlines Arena. Let's see what the TV designation is. Can't wait to find that out because I'm sure Calipari is going to make sure there's some prime time. There's a good national television audience for that game outside of the SEC network. All right, so that's your exhibition season and why I think some of that stuff matters. Recently we went through the entire schedule. I ranked the top 20 games. We've gone through the regular season stuff. The only thing we're waiting on now, we know the playing dates. By the way, remember when the SEC schedule came out, all the midweek dates were either or dates. It's going to be either a Tuesday or Wednesday. All that's been ironed out. If you go to HogvilleNET, up at the top of the jump ball form where I have the schedule, I have a link to where I rank the top 20 games on the schedule. But when you open that link, it's not only my top 20 games, but below that, I've got all 31 games in the playing dates laid out there. And so I've already updated that with all the midweek dates. So it's already been resolved as to which games will fall on Tuesdays, which ones are Wednesdays, and we already knew where and when. Now what we're waiting on are TV and times. Some of the times we already have. Arkansas in Illinois in the Turkey Throwdown on Thanksgiving Day. CBS, we know TV, and we know the time's 3 p.m. Michigan in the Jimmy V Classic on December 10th at Madison Square Garden in New York City. That's ESPN, the mothership, and that's at 8 p.m. Central Time. So we've got those two. The rest of them we're waiting on playing times and television. And so maybe that stuff gets rolled out here soon at some point. So that's really all we're waiting on, is we just went through what the exhibition schedule looks like, and Calipari released all of that on a tweet. Oh, just, black and white text. There weren't any cute graphics or anything like we often see with some of this stuff. It came out that way. All right, the last two things I'm going to talk about before we get out of here, and for those who stayed with me this long, I'm over an hour again. Man, I tend to do this. Thank you for doing it. It's HogvilleNET YouTube Live. One last request to subscribe, like, or share. And let's just wrap it up with this. As we get closer to the season, you start to see some of these preseason prognostications or thoughts or rankings roll out. John Rothstein's done a really good job. When he did his SEC power rankings weeks ago, he had Arkansas second behind Alabama. It's no surprise when he did Arkansas, when he looked at his top 45, the first one I've seen right around that time, Arkansas was a top 10 team. He had them at 9th. Well, if he thinks Arkansas is the second best team in a really good SEC behind Bama, who he had number one, and most preseason polls probably will have the Tide number one, Arkansas was not only second in his SEC pecking order, but the only other SEC school he had in the top 10. All right, Joe Lunardi's been updating his bracketology with ESPN bracketology. Everybody knows who Joe Lunardi is. And he initially, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago when he put one out, he had Arkansas as a 5 seed out of 10 SEC teams. He had 10 Big 12 teams and 10 SEC teams. Those are the two leading conferences in terms of how many teams he projects to the NCAA tournament, 68 team field. But he had Arkansas as a 5 seed. And he had several, Alabama as a 1. I think he had Auburn as a 2 or a 3, and Tennessee up there, actually. And he had Texas as a 4 seed. Arkansas was one of the 2 5 seeds. I think Texas A&M maybe was one at that time. And then he's just updated that this week. I think it was yesterday. And he has bumped Arkansas up to a 4 seed. So I've said for a while I think Arkansas should be in the top 3 or 4 teams mentioned in the SEC. I put my power rankings out. I had Alabama 1, Auburn 2, and Arkansas 3. So I put my money where my mouth was on that talking point going back a couple of months. But I also said Arkansas then, in my opinion, based on the way this is put together, this roster, based on what I see in college basketball, a top 10 to 15 rated team. Well, Lunardi, when he had Arkansas as a 5 seed, that's a range of 16 to 20. He bumped Arkansas up to a 4 seed. He moved Texas down from a 4 to a 5 in his bracketology that's updated. And he still has the SEC with 10 teams getting in, but he's dropped the Big 12 down to 9 teams. So according to Lunardi right now in this snapshot in time, he thinks the SEC will have more teams than any other conference. We know all this is going to play out. It may look much differently. When I really look at the teams in the SEC, I see 9 to 11 range of teams that are going to be worthy, NCAA tournament worthy. So I said I'll settle at 10-2 for now. Give it the average there, or the median range, or whatever it is. I wish I'd have paid more attention in school. But I will say this: I agree with Lunardi that the league is that strong. I like seeing Arkansas as a 4 seed. If you were to again compare that to a ranking, in theory, you're now in that 12 to 16 range when you get past the top 3 seeds. Because there's 4 brackets. And so you go from 13 to 16, 13, 14, 15, or 16, in that range in terms of how you would compare that to a ranking. We know polls don't necessarily line up with seedings, but it just gives you a ballpark of maybe the perception there. So it's in that 10 to 15, not quite 10 through 12, but it's close enough to see that some of these national folks have Arkansas in pretty high esteem. This will be another consecutive season for Arkansas going back a few years because of the great job that Eric Patrick Musselman, EPM, did leading up to last season. It shows you what the kind of job he did at Arkansas to now where Arkansas's year in and year out looking at preseason rankings, but John Calipari, to me, advances that even more. Please do not lose sight of, there's a lot of social media stuff, especially from Big Blue Nation, They point to March. That's what everybody remembers. And then you get brain fog about what happened before that. There have been a few outliers in 15 years at Kentucky for Calipari, but he consistently recruits top 5, top 10 classes, top 5 typically. He consistently has teams ranked in the top 10 to 15, top 20 for sure. And they've done really well in the SEC with very few outliers in regular seasons. It's just been a snapshot of the last 5 years. One of those being a COVID year where there was no postseason and Kentucky won the SEC. But let's be honest, even including that, they've not done well in the NCAA tournament. But coming into this season and what I think Arkansas has put together, a lot of the stuff we're seeing for some of these national guys jives with how I look at it. And one last thing, people still keep stirring with me about the Eric Patrick Melsman EPM thing. I see people comment on social media. Why do you do that? Wait, what? That just seems like it's being petty. It's not. This is not a negative thing. He did a great job at Arkansas. It's just kind of one of those situations where I started tuning in the middle of the season or early stages of SEC play that the guy's pursuing other jobs as his team's not doing very well. You're almost kind of like some of the stuff and the way it got back to me was kind of like, man, there's not like doing this fully under the cover of night. A lot of this stuff, how could you not know this wasn't going to get out? And it's almost like, I kind of thought of it like a parent coming into the kitchen and there's a 4 or 5-year-old trying to reach into the cookie jar. Well, they know the rules. No dessert until dinner. You know the rules. And so what does a parent do? A parent looks at the kid and says their full name. I'll use myself as an example. I got busted. I was a cookie monster. I got busted by that with my mom or my grandmother. It's Kevin Joseph McPherson. It's kind of one of those things. It's more playful, and it puts that situation in a different light. It's not really meant to be mean, and it's not really meant as a disrespect, because the argument could be the way that process pulled out might have been a little bit of disrespect on how that was actually done, kind of very cavalier. But I'm not trying to judge it as much how other people should see it. For me, it's been more of a playful thing, not meant to be mean-spirited. All right, we're almost an hour and 15 minutes. I don't know that I've ever gone that long. Probably have. I like to talk. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for joining us on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Until next time, thank you for being here, and we'll see you then.